So welcome to our session today, Lean Techniques for Small Businesses. The important topic for everyone who wants to have some more efficiency in their business. And we're joined today by Jon Jaggers, who is a lead consultant with the SBDC, has been consulting in general, but also specifically on this topic for years. And so great expert to have with us today. And before we jump into things, I do want to mention that we are recording this session. So you can refer back to it at any time. We'll post it afterwards in the video library on our website. And I will send out a follow-up email that has the recording and the slides as well. We do want this to be as interactive as possible. So please feel free to put any questions you have into the chat, or since we do have a smaller group today, as we have questions, you can come off mute and ask your questions verbally that way. And as always, you can schedule consulting appointments, free one-on-one remote appointments through our website, which is northmetrosbdc.com. Jon is one of our consultants, as I mentioned, who's available for appointments. And we also have several other consultants who are available as well, depending on what types of needs you have in your business right now. So with that, Jon, I will turn it over to you and I will pull up the slides for you.
All right. Thank you, Hannah. Just a little background on myself. I have 25 years of manufacturing management experience with some pretty big companies. I semi-retired like 7 years ago, and prior to that, I did receive a Lean certification out in California from UC Berkeley, and I've been applying those principles ever since. I've been fortunate to work for the SBDC for the last 7 years, and I've given this class and similar classes in the past. It's going to be an overview, so we'll dig into some aspects of it, but not a lot of detail. As Hannah mentioned, if you really want to take advantage of a more detailed implementation, I'm available and willing to help you with that. My focus in the past in the Lean has been manufacturing, but Lean can be applied to really any type of business. And I did a little research on the backgrounds of each one of you, so I know that we have a couple manufacturers, but mostly not, which is okay, because the whole thing that we're trying to push here towards is, how do we eliminate non-value added activities? And the number one resource that you have is your time. So hopefully we'll learn some things that will save time for you. So go ahead, Anna. So really the premise of Lean is very simple. It started off with the Japanese implemented in part of their Toyota system, but the term Muda is one that basically says any activity that absorbs resources but creates no value needs to be eliminated. There's all kinds of different Lean techniques. Like I say, we'll touch on some of them today. I'll do some illustrating with pictures and drawings. The real key to Lean is that there's no real capital investment other than a little bit of training time, either from your management staff and employees. And a lot of times in the past, I've given more detailed Lean training to entire companies and their employees, and they're the ones that will help with the execution. So there are a number of different types of waste that we're going to discuss today, including motion. Go ahead, Anna. Weighting, defects, non-utilized talent, and inventory control. So we'll start off with the next slide, motion. There you go. So from a standpoint of motion, it's really any unnecessary movement of people, equipment, or machinery. I know probably more or less, I don't think you are manufacturers, so it's people people primarily, how to best utilize them. And we'll talk in some detail how to optimize that. But any motion includes walking, lifting, reaching, bending, and stretching. And then some countermeasures for motion include, first of all, your workspace has to be very organized, placing equipment near the person, and putting materials at an ergonomic position to avoid stretching and straining. Little story on, like I said earlier, I got my certification out in California, but I was running a plant in California, and they had a high level of back and neck injuries, a lot of movement. So I was able to hire an ergonomic specialist from the junior college, which was really great. And what we did is a number of different things that are worth mentioning. The first thing was workstation layout, where everything was within reach and there was no strain and leaning forward. Everything was the right position, right where the employee could reach it. We actually did some stretching exercises, which is interesting. We would do stretching exercises at the beginning of the shift and halfway through. Very simple stretching exercises, but just the fact that to get your employees to stand up and move around a little bit it is very helpful to avoid any kind of injuries. I also purchased ergonomic chairs and stools for the employees. Now you would think, oh, that's going to be very expensive. Amazingly, even today, you can go to Amazon and pick up a really nice lumbar support chair for $150. And let me tell you, I've got a couple of them. They are well worth the money and the comfort and the support that they provide. The other thing that we did is we purchased some standing desks and workstations. The desks that come up, and you would think those are expensive also, but they're also they're about $250 on Amazon. So ergonomics is really important from a motion standpoint. Okay, Hannah. Oh, go back one, because you got to see that. Can you go back? There you go. Oh, no. I want to show you the guy. Okay, excess motion. Here's the guy I call this spaghetti diagram. He's moving all around the place. Whatever he's building or putting together is very unorganized. So that's excess motion in a little diagram there. So cartoon. Okay, go ahead. So this is a little more explanation of ergonomics. It's repetitive bending, twisting, turning, etc. I found an article that said in 2021, strains, sprains, or tears accounted for 30% of the days away from work for employers. So I thought that was pretty significant. So not only does ergonomics reduce the risk of work injury, but also improves the health of allowing employees to perform their work and enjoy, improve quality of life outside of work. They don't have to deal with back or neck injuries. Okay.
I just want to mention, John, I think that's a really great point that you bring up there, because, I think sometimes this can be seen as less important or, kind of a minuscule detail to be looking at as a business owner. But when we look at retention with employees, that's a huge issue that we're seeing right now. And even those little things that we can be doing to improve the daily lives of our employees while they're at work, I think in the long run does make a big difference and does improve the quality of life for our employees and want them to stay and want them to, encourage them to want to come to work. So even though it seems like a little thing, I think it adds up.
It's never really not a big investment either, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, when I was out in California, we would kind of buy those chairs and stools in groups by department, and it was like, oh my gosh. But once we had done it one time, it's like the applause and the cheering and everything else was, oh my God, you're getting rid of my 40-year-old chair. So it was pretty amazing. That does make a difference.
Yes.
The next item is waiting. And really in any organization, your waiting waste can include waiting for materials, waiting for others upstream, and waiting for instruction. So, and again, I know you're not necessarily a manufacturing environment, but anytime your employees are waiting for either the next thing to do or the next customer, then there is some wasted time. Really, the way to level that out is having, I call them stringent schedules, but any type of really solid schedules, standardizing the work instructions, and developing multi-skilled workers who've been trained accordingly. Okay, go ahead, Anna.
Quick question on this one, John. Wondering if you have any insight on how to best handle waiting when it's out of your control. Like, so often we see supply chain issues, especially lately. And so you're waiting on supplies or materials or whatever it may be. So a little bit different than this type of waiting, but what would you recommend to still optimize your workforce during that season?
Yeah, I think, because of supply chain challenges, I've got a number, most of my clients have been facing supply chain challenges. What I recommend is unfortunately, you got to put together a very flexible schedule, make sure that you do have all the materials and supplies available before you start work. Even some of my most very sophisticated manufacturers face the same thing, but they have put some discipline into making sure that all the materials and supplies are available. They're set up on a cart, and then the employees start to work on them. Anytime you have to sit there and wait, or if you have to change and do work on a different job, there's wasted time. So I think that's probably the answer.
Yeah, great, thank you.
So this has to do with standard work instructions, SWI. Particularly if you can put together standard work instructions that are visual. They're really a convenient way to check operators' actions and initiate improvements. When it is visual, it provides employees with a good memory of what the best practices are, and it can be updated at any point in time. Doesn't have to be anything complex. Even some simple training aids are very, very helpful, and really are a good aid from a standpoint of training goes. Okay. Defects. Probably you would think, well, what do I do? We don't have any defects because you're not necessarily manufacturing. Don't be so quick on that one. Anytime that you have a potential customer that doesn't get what they want, that the order has not been fulfilled properly, there's got to be a breakdown at some point in the process. And so you got to design a process that will catch those abnormalities and be very open and candid about it, and then standardize the work in order to make that a very consistent process. Many times we overlook defects, but they're very costly because could first of all, you got to redo it, and then second of all, you may lose a customer who's not happy. So standardizing and being aware of those defects is very, very important. Okay.
Interesting. I just want to mention, we have heard from a creative client before on what they do with defects, and they were not a manufacturer. They owned a coffee shop, and they would put out, if they had baked goods or something, or drinks that, were made incorrectly, but nothing was unsafe about them or anything, they would offer them at discounted prices or even free to customers to still make use of that product and to still, you know, create some goodwill between customers. Everyone loves free whatever it might be. So maybe there's still some ways that those items with defects can still be utilized if it's safe, and when it's communicated that this isn't our, you know, top quality product, but almost like a trial type product. So I thought that was a creative way to still make use of some of those.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. You want to do whatever you got to do to retain your customers, but the is you need to figure out why in fact you are having those defects, and try to streamline things where you don't have. One thing that I've noticed in dealing with clients is complexity, meaning they try to offer everything in the world, but they need to pay attention to those products and or services that well, number one, will provide the best margin, but keeping it simple, because the more complexity you have, the more opportunity there is for mistakes. So
yeah, great point.
So inventory. I don't know if any of you really have any inventory, but boy, if you do, this is such a key point. Really, what inventory control is so important, because the cash flow impact is phenomenal. And I know right now, as Hannah mentioned, that it's difficult to try to balance out inventory with supply chain issues. I know a number of my clients probably have excess inventory right now, but that's what they got to do in order to keep their operation running. So it's a balance. I don't know what you use. If you have inventory, I'm not sure what you use, but I always recommend QuickBooks, because you can establish mins and maxes and adjust those very quickly in QuickBooks, and that gives you good control of really what your inventory is. Okay.
And I will also give a quick plug that we have a consultant on our team who specializes in QuickBooks. Her name is Carol Johnson, and I can put her calendar link here in the chat when we're done if you would want some support with that, because sometimes QuickBooks can feel overwhelming if you're not familiar with it, but we can definitely help you with that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ann. So this is one of my favorite points of waste, and it's called underutilized talent. It's the waste of unused human talent and ingenuity. So the way that Lean says to get around this is to make sure that training is well documented and effective. I do a consulting on what's called skills matrix, and what that involves is I will sit down with the client and go through and define the different levels of skills that are required to perform the job for their employees, and put that in writing and make it progressive. And it's used as a training learning tool, and it's also used as a performance management tool. So the very fact that training's got to be there, it's got to be I think in a formal basis. And the other thing that skills matrix does, my clients, when I do it, they present it to a new employee on the first day. They know right away what the expectations are. And one of the biggest complaints that you will hear from any employee, or new employees in particular, is, what are my expectations? What does the company want me to do? So you have clear expectations, you have a skills matrix, and you have some performance feedback. That's all those are all inclusive and very, very important part of Lean. Okay, we're going to kind of skip over this, but now we're going to get exposure to some of the tools that will also help from a standpoint of being organized. So go ahead, Hannah. So we'll discuss the following, what's called Kanban staging, visual factory. Don't let visual factory scare you because it doesn't have to be in the factory. 5S techniques and Kaizen events. So the first one is Kanban utilization. So again, in a manufacturing environment and or a service or retail organization, feeding parts and materials in organized fashion from a location that is near the workstation or the employee. I can tell you that this is probably one of the most effective tools of Lean because, again, you go back to motion, it minimizes motion when in fact things are organized and they are very close to where the employee is working, operating. And then if you do, again, and this is primarily manufacturing, but the Kanban bins, which we'll show you some pictures here in a second, it can be barcoded to scan. That really helps with your replenishment rates and your control of inventory. Another interesting point about Kanban is in the retail environment. I don't know if you know this or not, but when you walk into the big grocery or big box stores, they don't just put things on the shelf helter skelter. Things are put on the shelves and organized based on customer consumption, and pretty interesting. You walk into a King Soopers or Safeway, whatever, you'll notice around the outside are all the high use, high ticket items, and then in between is a bunch of other things. So it's a Kanban system. They can, but also at the same time, if they do have a software system, with Kanban, they can trigger replacement when it reaches a threshold. So surprisingly, and there is software out there that we can talk about here a little later on, but it's pretty amazing that when you shop at the bigger stores, they know what you purchased and they know what your next move is. Amazon is amazing. I mean, I just don't know how. Like yesterday, I had a package delivered to my front step. My Alexa went off and said, "You have a package of porch covers at your porch." So that's pretty amazing stuff. But basically, it says, "Oh no, I just made Alexa come on." Too much noise. Anyway, Kanban is really very useful. The other thing that part of Kanban that because it does organize your workflow, there are some scheduling software app systems that are really, really good. And we'll talk about those in a minute. Okay, go ahead. This shows really the Kanban bin. If you are in an environment where you do have a lot of parts, then these can be used and they can be scanned, and that feeds right to your QuickBooks, and you know exactly where you need to replenish and reorder. Okay, go ahead. This is kind of an illustration of what I was talking about. Kanban and retail, they know where the hot items are and where the traffic patterns are of their customers. So it's pretty unique and pretty intelligent for sure. Go ahead, Anna. Okay, we're talking about visual factoring. Visual factoring is really a lot of different things, but really it's creating visual cues when executed well, demonstrate indication of status, either to standard or not to standard. That sounds a little complicated, but it really isn't. It's really what it is, just pure visual feedback is what it boils down to. And also visual factoring can be used in training aids that will help with technical learning. And then the other part is you can actually have build drawings or videos as part of the visual factory. And these again don't have to be complex. You can take videos of proper procedures, proper methodology, and with your phone, and put them on a laptop and use them for training. The intent, though, is to eliminate waste in real time. So we'll see a couple of examples here. This is a production efficiency board. This is Visual Factory. This gentleman was my production manager in Georgia. A very detailed guy. I love the fact that every morning with the crew, we would sit down and go through the previous day's operating performance, both from a production standpoint and a quality standpoint. So you can see that they're discussing production defects, and then at the very bottom there, the bottom right, are some positive steps or corrective actions that are being taken to improve those numbers. Okay, this is one of my operators in Georgia. Also, they're using, this is a interactive assembly monitor. So as he's putting parts together, he just touches the screen and shows them the next step. So I'm not expecting that any of you are going to have these this as sophisticated, but you don't really have to be that sophisticated. As I said earlier, if you use your phone video to record the proper techniques and then put that on a laptop and or another screen, that's really a tremendous visual factory training aid.
And John, how often would you have employees, or would you recommend that employees review those videos or the training aids? And how often do you as the manager update that information?
That's a good question. So they're used primarily for a new employee training until it becomes habit as to what they're working on. But in this particular plant, we were constantly changing parts, constantly changing what we were building. So it was almost a continuous. I had two industrial engineers that did nothing but provide the information all the time. I would say in a less industrial environment, again, you can put it together. If in fact things do change, then you need to have a retraining by using this technique. And but I can tell you, a lot of my clients today use this, and they're amazed by how effective it is. So I'm going to answer your question, as needed, I guess is the answer.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. And I think, like you've shown here, it's nice, maybe comforting for the employees to know that they can always access that if they need a refresher or they are just forgetting or something, that it's there as a resource to support them.
Oh, absolutely. The monitor stays right there. And we actually put some other things on the monitor, believe it or not. We would record their throughput and their quality on the monitor. So like once an hour would pop up as to how they're performing. That sounds like Big Brother, but we would pay for performance, and if they did well, they would get the pay. So that's how it worked.
Yeah, great.
This is just another really simple illustration of a visual factory. This is just basically a chart that I put together. Again, this was at the plant in Georgia. We had gone from two different major production lines. The changeover time was critical. When I got there was 16 hours for one line and 8 hours for another. And we got that down to what looks like 6 hours and 2 hours. Really, that was just awareness and having all the equipment and the parts available during changeover. We would have changeover meetings beforehand with everybody involved. And it was like a NASCAR, well, not quite like NASCAR, but the NASCAR techniques of everybody is ready and everybody jumped on it. So it saved a lot of time. But again, that's just a really simple chart. I think metrics are really important, and that made a big difference.
Great.
Okay, we're going to talk about 5S, and this is one of the main principles of lean, and I'll just take you through the steps. Sorting is eliminating any unnecessary items that are in the office, production floor, retail. Is basically a cleansing of things that you don't use. Then straightening or setting order is actually making sure that your parts, your tools, your office equipment is all laid out in a very efficient way to encourage good workflow. Sweeping or shining. I've always been a big believer that housekeeping, no matter what the environment, is really, really important because it creates some pride in your work area. Then standardizing, that means gets back to operating principles we talked about, being consistent and standardize your operating procedures. And then the hard part with 5S is sustaining that discipline. So if you make those changes, it's up to management and convincing employees that this is the way you're going to operate from that point forward. So this is just a little chart that shows the 5 S's. I think it's pretty straightforward, but I'll go through it anyway. So sorting is clearly distinguish needed items. So those that are not needed, and which amazingly, there's a lot of things probably that are not needed, are eliminating, and then put them in a very organized fashion, straighten, keep the environment clean, standardize from a standpoint of not just the area, but work procedures, and then sustain. Sustain is the hard part. Okay. This is another cartoon I really like. This is illustration of sorting, eliminating item. They got a hodgepodge of a mess on the left-hand side before 5S. After 5S, they've got everything organized, yellow lines on the work area. Everything goes in a certain place. They've got bins that are clearly marked so that the employee or the operator knows exactly where everything is. So that is sorting. This is set order or straightening. This is just an example of a retail outlet that has things very, very well organized. Okay. This is a this is the extreme example of Hannah has seen this before, so she's got to laugh when I explain this. This is the extreme example of shining and sweeping. This is a Procter & Gamble diaper plant, and you could literally eat off the floor in this plant. It wasn't my plant, although I certainly took groups of employees over here because we created the plastic film that they use in the backing of diapers, and so I would take employees over there and say, look, this is how we should and could look. Pretty amazing. And I was over there probably 10 times, never changed, always very clean. This is an example of standardizing. This is actually this is one of my clients, and they just have everything is so well organized and standardized that you can walk. This is just one workstation. They have like 6 or 7 of them you can walk up to, and no matter what, everything is in the same place. So that creates some really good efficiency, knowing where your parts and tools are at. Okay, the next thing I'm going to talk about is Kaizen events. These are really short-term brainstorming and implementation sessions that are meant to improve an existing process. It's really important when you have a Kaizen event that you have someone in management or someone that is knowledgeable to facilitate that process. And really the employees that are doing the work are the most knowledgeable, and they should be the participants in a Kaizen event. I think it's important that you do use some type of methodology to go through this brainstorming process. Really what I recommend is what I call DMAIC, which is basically define a problem, measure where the opportunities are, analyze those opportunities, implement the improvement, and then if in fact you get the good results from the improvement, then you document and control that process. Okay. So some opportunities of improvement would be developing skill training for management and the staff, some ways to effectively schedule, both utilization and enhancements to scheduling, and standardize and document best practices that we've talked about, improvements in and use of technology or software application. There are just so many good applications out there today that you can use in your operation that are not expensive, that really will save you time. And then the other thing is potentially networking ideas from vendors and even competitors. Believe it or not, you can network. If you go to their website, you can get ideas of what your competitors are doing. Sometimes even talk to them. So, okay. So what does Lean do? They should come from employees who do the work. I think that's the most important, because they know where the problems lie. And when they're given the opportunity to make suggestions and they use the tools that we talked about, Kanban, Visual Factory, and Kaizen events, it's going to, because they have a system and they provide input, it's going to generate enthusiasm and buy-in for those improvements. And the bottom line is those Lean techniques will eliminate waste while improving your efficiency and quality. Thank you for time and attention.
Great.
Okay. Do you have questions?
Yes. Yeah, we do have some questions. Let me get my screens to cooperate here. We do have some questions, and for those of you who have other questions, like now is a great time to put those into the chat. But we'll start with a few that have come in. I know you mentioned a couple different times how important scheduling is. Do you have any favorites that you'd recommend for scheduling tools?
I do. Matter of fact, that you mentioned some really good, very simple and non-expensive scheduling apps are what's called Mondays.com. And 3 or 4 of my clients are using Mondays.com right now, and it's amazing that, first of all, you can start off simple. You can have a simple schedule of the different pieces or projects that you're working on, and it'll break it down into the different elements of that project or product. So that's Mondays.com is pretty amazing. The other one that I would recommend is called Smart Sheets. Smart Sheets is also a scheduling and a project management tool. Again, both of those they're easy to use. I don't get paid to advertise these, but they're easy to use and they're not that expensive. So they're really pretty good tools. And like I said earlier, taking advantage of these kind of tools will save you time, will save your employees time. The use of QuickBooks will aid you in inventory control, cash flow, and keeping track of really where you're at financially, which is critical, without a doubt.
Yes, great. Thank you for those suggestions. Another question about the 5S process. Ideally, what is your timeline for that? How long should that process take?
Yeah, really depends on the complexity of your operation. If you're if you're a 1 or 2 person operation, probably takes a couple weeks. If you're a much bigger organization, to really do it properly and thoroughly, it probably takes a couple months. And again, keep in mind that I'm available to help you with really any of these tools. 5S is probably the most complicated, and I have implemented it, used it, probably 10 or 15 different clients, and it's worked well. So, okay.
Great, thank you. Another question about the Kaizen events. So you do this brainstorming, you implement the changes, you measure all of that. What happens when it turns out that it wasn't the right approach? Do you just start back at the beginning, and how do you handle that when you need to maybe backtrack a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, you would start over. You want to take, again, looking at DMAIC, you want to make sure that you have the proper data, enough data to be able to say this is the direction we need to go. Don't consider it a failure. Consider it a bit of an experimentation. But yes, you would have to start over.
Great, good to know. But hopefully, it sounds like because it's such an intentional process that you would discover that, whatever issues there might be before you get too far down the line. Do you find that to be the case?
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Absolutely. And again, it's key that those people that are doing the work, whatever the work is, are provide the input, because they know what the hurdles are, and they know, once somebody listens to them in management or ownership, they I already know the answer to that, but you just haven't been listening. But use methodology to get there, and then once you devise some improvements, then it's very important that you document those and make sure everybody's following that new procedure or new operating way. Okay.
Great. Yes. You also mentioned earlier on about some inventory management software, and most of our clients are not at the level of Amazon, but it is important to be aware of, what products are selling the best, and how can you put those strategically in a place where clients or customers are going to be seeing that. What approach would you recommend for someone who's just getting started with that process to effectively manage it?
I guess from a standpoint of creating mins and maxes, QuickBooks is really the best. Really, all my clients use QuickBooks. From a standpoint of a retail operation, as to how to lay it out most effectively, Hannah, that's a good question. I don't know the best software, but I'll certainly find out and let everyone know.
Well, maybe some of that is trial and error too. And I know we have heard from clients that just customer feedback is really helpful, as they hear from customers as to what they're looking for and what they were happy that they found and things like that. And probably a continual process that you grow into, I would think.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, without the complexity of some sophisticated software, that you got to listen to your customers, like you say. And again, the other thing that I mentioned earlier is keep your product offerings as simple as possible when you start out, because you're going to be overwhelmed if you try to offer everything. You can't be everything. You got to be what you feel like your customers need the most, that relieve those pain points of whatever it is. I love the two word pain points, because and that's what you're doing from a standpoint of providing a service or a product, eliminating pain points, but keep it simple in the beginning.
Yeah, that is excellent advice. That's probably one of the biggest pitfalls or mistakes that we see that new businesses fall into in the beginning, is they're so excited and they want to offer, all of their ideas at once. But it becomes hard to keep it organized and lean, like this whole thing has been about, but also hard to then communicate what the value is to customers when it's getting muddled with, how is this all fitting together? So just like you're saying, it's usually best to start with what you're best at, and start narrow and grow wide as you develop more confidence and maybe bring on more of a team to help with some of those extra demands that are going to be put on your business. So that's really great advice that we see a lot.
I think that's a very good point. I've got a perfect example of that, if we can just take a second.
Yeah.
I've got a relatively new client that he's a skateboarding expert, and he's also a photo video expert at the same time. So he has put together a huge business plan to build a skateboarding facility in Colorado, and his problem is they can't get the funding because this is like a $500,000 investment for the skateboarding facility. So we talked several times, and I told him, I said, first things you need to do is keep it simple. You obviously can, because of your skills, can put together a good training class, video training class on skateboarding, and also you have some products that you're trying to sell. Start there, create a reputation, create some revenue, and then once you have at least 6 months worth of solid revenue, then you can go to an investor and they'll talk about it. But prior to that, not going to happen. So very good point, Hannah.
Yeah, thank you. Great. Well, those are all of our questions for right now. And I am going to put one more link here in the chat if you want to schedule. I put John's link in there directly. I put Carol's link in there directly for you all. But if you also want to just take a look at any of our consultants that you can schedule with, depending on what's matching up best with your own schedule, you can take a look at that there. John, any last words of advice or wisdom you'd like to leave us all with today?
Well, I think what I would say, we did a broad brush coverage of lean. My intent was not to make you 100% lean experts after this 40-some minutes, but certainly you can come back around and like Hannah said, request my consulting or one of the other consultants consulting. But I think it is what hopefully you walked away with the idea that time is your most critical resource, both not just from your standpoint, but from your employee standpoint. So some of these techniques are simple enough that you can implement them. Again, don't try to take them all on at one time. Be progressive. Whatever you think is going to have the biggest impact, then you should do that. And I'll be glad to work with you on any one of them.
Great. Thank you, John. That was very helpful and encouraging. And there's just one more question about sharing the PowerPoint slides. We will be sending out the recording and the slides later on today. So you'll have all of this helpful info. So thank you so much, John, for all the great content. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And we wish you a great afternoon.
All right. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, everyone.